Is done. So thank you for listening to me ramble for about 10 minutes. I always tend to ramble on about stuff that I've been doing recently at work. And what I've been doing a lot of recently at work is migrating a website with about 11 different domains into a single domain and dealing with all of the joys that go with that when you're trying to get multiple domains all into a single one. So this is really a story about just little kind of things that I already knew about rewriting URLs and redirecting stuff and how to actually test them. So we'll imagine the wonderful scenario that we have. We have a shiny new beautifully branded website. We've got amazing URL structures. SEO team have literally done everything SEO teams do, which is usually reasonably irritating, but it kind of gets you to a place where something's going to index well and we're all very happy. And then right at the tail end of the project, certainly from my experience over the last 20 years, someone goes, oh yeah, so there's some old URLs, we need them to still work and they need to go to some new pages or go somewhere else. And at this point, everyone kind of sits around going, oh, right, so we need to audit the old website. We need to get out what all of those URLs were. We need to map where they went to and figure out how we're going to do stuff. And we need to think about all the other things like whether it needs to be HTTPS, whether it needs to be lowercase, whether it needs to have a trailing slashes or not, whether you want dubs or not. And we kind of go and look at all these things. And we start looking at how they're going to map. And we start looking at the wonders of permanent redirects. And this, in my experience, is also where developers then have a hissy fits, because we write permanent redirects and we write redirect files, and it's all very good and well until someone gets a redirect wrong. And then the response is, oh, it's okay, just clear your browser cache. And you clear your browser cache, and everyone else has still got the wrong redirect because it's cached, and they're not going to think to go and clear their browser cache. They're just going to visit your website and go to the wrong place. So it's great, you know, we're using it to point to our new pieces of content, and we're replacing all of our broken links, but we need to make sure that before we put all these things live, we actually have them working and working in the most effective way. Now, one of the things that I came across in the last few years really with these is multi-hop versus redirect chaining. So I come from a, surprisingly enough, Microsoft-centric kind of background, where we work a lot with URL rewrite module in IIS for the good old days, back with ASP Classic, and everyone loved it and it was wonderful. And you used to write these big, horrendous files. You can still do that, but you can also do other things in .NET. So we can set up different rewrite options when you're setting up your application and starting your host. The difference with multi-hop and redirect chaining is quite a big one. So if you look at the left-hand side here, this is kind of your very typical redirect stack. You've got a load of different rules doing different things. One, you know, as I say, making sure that everything's actually HTTPS. One that makes sure everything's lowercase. I really should have made sure I could read the text on my slide from this angle. That's a lovely font. But you can see there's 5 different rules there, and each one of those requests potentially is going to go backwards and forwards between the client and the server each time. So if we don't satisfy every single one of those rules on the first request, we're actually technically making 5 requests to the server, and that's really going to kind of start slowing things down. On the other side, we're trying to be more clever about it, and I'll kind of roughly go through some of the detail in a minute about what we're doing there. But we do the whole lot in one go. So rather than doing 5 individual redirects, we're actually rewriting, and every single rule is a rewrite role right until the very end where it goes, oh, stuff changed, I'll now redirect you to the final result. The way we actually achieve that, and I really wish I had the demo, but we pass all these rules and we're just rewriting and prefixing everything with an underscore. Get right down to the end here, and our last rule, which is it's this one, I believe. Yeah, the final rule picks up anything that's got that and then finally does a redirect to what you've done. So it stacks all of those different rules that we're going to process. This isn't a very big file, so you can't really see that much, but it does them all in one go, which surprisingly makes SEO people very happy. So the reason that multiple redirects are bad, there's basically 3 key points to it. Increased page load time, it doesn't necessarily affect your application, what your application does, but it's all those round hops backwards and forwards to the server. You're going backwards and forwards each time. Might only be a few milliseconds, but if you've got a busy server with lots of redirects, it's a bit of a pain. You've also got the loss of link equity. So You'll also hear a phrase like link juice. So it's the authority of any one particular link. And every time you go down a redirect, you lose a little bit of that authority. And eventually, 5 or 6 deep, it's just, you're going to tank on the search engine. So we have to try and keep that number down. And then crawl budget, which is one that people don't necessarily think about. If your site's really big with a lot of pages, you get a certain amount of time on Googlebot, on Bing, I believe it is. They'll spend a certain amount of time crawling your site. If it's big and it's doing a lot of redirects, they'll use your time allotment up and they'll come back to it later. So your site index is slower if you have too many redirects. So that's kind of why we try to keep all these down, why we say it's bad. There are 2 ways to do redirects. If Dan's little pointer's got enough battery, this way down here, where I'm using a file, which is my preferred way. So this is your old IIS URL rewrite file. It's perfect because you can chain redirects. Or you've got this method up here, which is kind of more of the inline, where we're just kind of using built-in methods. You can add rules and redirects and mappings in here. But I have yet to find a way in there to chain things. Each one of these happens as soon as you get one of those rules hit, it does the redirect, and then you've got to come back for your next request and next request and next request. So whilst it might be more readable in the code version, it's not necessarily so great if you want to keep your redirects down. What is useful about this one here, though, however, is certainly the project I was doing at the moment, I've got 2 sets of redirects. One is all of the mappings of old URLs to new URLs, and some of them it's like old URLs to new URLs, because we've got like years and years of historic redirects. But we've also got vanity URLs built into the application. So we use this before the rewrite files themselves to load all of our vanity URLs in. So we can go through one set of rules to do that redirect, and then if it's not any of the vanity URLs we want, we then fall into the next sort of redirects to deal with those. So they're both quite useful. You can use them both together. However, the kind of key point and the key learning I got on the project I was doing now is typically the way I would test stuff is I would create host headers on my machine, and I would start up my web app, and I would like throw requests at it and make sure that everything was coming through and mapping okay in all the domains, especially in this instance where we're going from .de to .com/DEDE and stuff like that. We'd use host headers to make all of that work. And it's quite painful and it's quite slow, and it's actually a bit annoying on a Mac, personally, to do that. It's okay on Windows, but I was finding it a bit irritating doing it on the Mac. So I went around looking for a different way to do it, and that's when I found something awesome in xUnit with the host builder, and I was a very, very happy person. Essentially what I'm doing in xUnit, and we'll have a look at the code in a minute, and some of it you actually saw on a previous slide, is pulling in the rewrite mapping file from my web project, and I pull it into basically a test project. And inside there, I've got a whole load of test suites that run a simple host. They don't have any of the rest of the application because I don't care about the rest of the application. I just care about my rewrite file because I want to know when I put it live, the Danish people aren't going to be apoplectic because their website doesn't work properly anymore. But it means I can specify tests for those particular cases. I can spot check some of the bigger rules. So if you've got a big rewrite map for hundreds and hundreds of product pages that now are no longer all product ID = 4, they've got proper URLs. You can spot check some of those, make sure they work, and you get that confidence that actually your redirects are doing what they need to do. It looks very much like this. There's my file. It's actually even smaller than it was earlier, but congratulations, I can't make that bigger. But that's a very simple rule. I can point kind of things out here. We've got this randomness up here, which is dealing with domains, and those domains go through a rewrite map to say, well, if it's this domain, then I want to append that folder, etc., and move things about. And as for the code, this is it. That's literally all it does. We're going in, we're using a host builder there, which I realised actually some of that is set up slightly outside of this code. So I can pull it over. There we go. So let's just go to the right file, which is that it? Right at the top here. So all I've got is an iHost over here, and then I've got domain redirects is the constructor of the entire xUnit project, which goes and builds that host file. So there it is, pulling in the files that it wants to use, just rewrite rules.xml on there, and that is pretty much everything. Then the xUnit tests themselves, you can see what I meant about spot checking. We're using theories in xUnit so that I can push multiple URLs as test samples through. Oh, hello, I don't know what I did there. It's exciting when you're using it sideways. But yeah, all of these tests basically do exactly what I needed them to do. You'll see here though, I do have a red test. This one red test was actually up here. It's the example of not using the redirect file, but actually using these two methods to see that they don't stack at all. So if I've got one URL that doesn't match both of those rules, it just fails straight away because the final target URL is not what I need it to be. It's only the first rule being mapped. And yeah, I mean, I'm just basically repeating exactly what I just said about using inline data and theory. So xUnit, amazing, very good for testing stuff. But this is by far and away the best way of testing redirects that I've come along with. And funnily enough, literally as I was trying to leave my office / desk / bedroom today to come here, I was genuinely on a call with someone explaining all of this to them exactly because they couldn't actually figure out how to test their directs. So it's pretty good and worth using. So that's me, done.